So glad to be here today. So thankful you're here. We are closing out our series called One Hit Wonder, and the whole staff makes fun of me because I don't know, I'm like music deprived. Not in the sense of like music was withheld from me, but I just don't know a lot about music. And so they're all like, have you heard this song? I'm like, no. And they've actually stopped asking me if I know songs now because they already know what the answer is going to be. And so when we launched this series called One Hit Wonder, if I'm just being transparent, I didn't even know what a one hit wonder was. So I'm about to preach a message to you on a concept I just learned about. So buckle up. We're going to have a good time. For those of you who are like me that didn't know, a one-hit wonder, as I've learned, is a hit, a big song that a writer had that they released that just went massive, like very viral all over the world. But it was the only song they had that went big. And so we just kind of identify that writer with that song. And even though they may have 100 songs, that's the song. Y'all know what I'm talking about? So we've been in this series called One Hit Wonder where we've taken titles of different hits, different songs, and we're actually preaching messages around those titles. And today, the title of a song is probably one that you've heard, hopefully. Anybody ever heard the song 1,000 Miles? All right, there's a few. All right, that's pretty good. That's more than first service. All right, 1,000 Miles was in 2002, and it was so big that Vanessa Carlton, when she launched her debut album with that song on it, it was the only song everybody knew, but she sold 1 million copies of that album because of that song. And I'm going to try this. I tried this in first service. I don't know. It's kind of a hard song to play, but I think there are a few people in here who have not heard of that song. Can y'all hear that? All right, so I'm going to try to play this just for those who don't know. Y'all know it? That's pretty good. That's all right. That's not bad. So now everybody knows that little jingle that it introduces with. And so I wanted everybody to be on the same page as we start this morning. But the song, the lyrics in that song are actually really powerful. Here's what the lyrics say. It says, "And I still need you and I still miss you. And I wonder if I could fall into the sky. Do you think that time would pass us by? Because you know I'd walk 1,000 miles if I could just see you," help me, "tonight." All right, and it's really powerful to actually think about that song because it points to the gospel. The writer of that song is saying, hey, I'm willing to do anything, even if it means me walking from here to Oklahoma City. That's about 1,000 miles, right? Even if it means me walking 1,000 miles, if I can see you tonight, I'm in. Count me in. I'm ready. Whatever it takes. Anybody, any man ever in here ever felt that way about a girl? So you teenagers, don't raise your hands. You're just not, I don't know. Y'all know 13-year-olds are like, I love you. You know what I mean? We're in a process here. We're praying, and God's really slowing things down, and I'm thankful for that. But the writer's saying, I'm willing to pay any price. And watch, that really points to the gospel in a powerful way. Because as we who know the story, we recognize that God was really willing to pay any price. You with me? Any price to actually see us, to be able to dwell with us, and to be able to do life with us. So we're going to talk about today how far God was willing to go. And man, he went a long way, didn't he? Head nod if you're with me so far. Man, he went a long way. And so we're going to jump in. Are you ready? Shout yes. All right, let's get it. And before I jump in, this song's very fitting. I ran a triathlon yesterday, and I feel today like I've run 1,000 miles. And the body's just like, I've heard day two's worse, so I'm buckling in for tomorrow. But 1,000 miles, God has gone a long way. Let's jump in. We're going way back. When I say way back, I mean Genesis chapter 1. That's where we're going to start today. Genesis chapter 1, God created the heavens and the earth. Over the next 4 days, not counting that day, so for the first 5 days of creation, God actually creates everything we see. The mountains, the seas, the forest, the sky, the heavens, beyond our atmosphere, whatever's beyond there, he just created. How did he create it? He opened his mouth and spoke, and it happened. Isn't that just wild? Can we just relish in that for a minute? Like if I said, hey, go make a tree. You could not just open your mouth and speak and say, tree. And you know what I'm saying? Like, this is wild. We blow past Genesis 1 like it's just nothing. When we realize the power that is actually in God as he opens his mouth and begins to create the world. We see that happen the first 5 days. He creates the animals, the seas, the sea creatures, the birds of the air, everything that we see. But on day 6, he goes to another step. Who does he create on day 6? He creates man. And it's crazy. He didn't just create man with his mouth. He actually whipped up a pile of dust. And somehow, when he told it to, that dust became organs, nerve endings, an entire nervous system, blood vessels, skin, ligaments, tendons. Somebody help me understand that for a minute. That he just, there it was. Not like in a magician, weird way. He's just God, and he's full of power. And when he speaks, things happen. To take things to another level, he doesn't just leave man alone. He said it's not good for man to be by himself. He said, I'm going to create him a helper. What was the helper's name? Eve. What'd you say? What'd you say? Woman. I got you. So he created Adam. He created Eve. How did he create Eve? When Adam fell into a deep sleep, he actually pulled a rib out of Adam and made Eve. Somebody help me get that. Like, what is happening in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2? Are you with me? So we see the power of God on full display, and he takes man, he takes woman, and he puts them in the garden that was called Eden. Here's why he put them in Eden. He put them in that garden because he desired fellowship with people. If you actually go and study different aspects of the Bible, I don't have time to go into it today, but one psalmist wrote, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. And so before God created the world, he was still in existence. He was already there. So why would he create the world and put people in it? Because he desired to be in relationship with people. He really wanted to spend an eternity with a people that he had chosen and a people that he so deeply loved. So he places man in this garden and everything's awesome. Man and woman have fellowship with God. It's his dream, man. His dream's coming to life. He's getting to fellowship with his people, and he gave Adam and Eve several commands, but he told them in one of those commands, hey, I need you to be fruitful, and I need you to multiply, and I need you to subdue the earth. What was he saying? God's like, Adam, Eve, I need y'all to have children who have children who have children who have children until the entire earth is filled with Eden, until the entire earth is filled with a really big population that I can do life with, that I can have fellowship with. Things didn't go as planned, did they? Genesis chapter 3, the fall of man takes place as the serpent comes in and deceives Eve. Eve eats the very tree God said don't touch. You read the story? Then he takes it to Adam. Adam eats a fruit from the tree. And now, in this, I want to call it this, the greatest tragedy the earth had ever known. Man had sinned against God, and God, who is perfect and is holy in his nature, can have nothing to do with sin. And so now God's dream of fellowship and of doing life with his people cannot happen in the way that he dreamed it to, because man had sinned. And now God and man are separate. We read the end of Genesis 3, man and woman get kicked out of the garden. They can no longer dwell in Eden. They have to work for their livelihood for the rest of their lives. We begin to see in Genesis 4, 5, 6, and 7 how quickly sin begins to wreak havoc throughout the earth. We see the first murder happen. We see wickedness spread through idolatry and through paganism. And it got to the point where God was so fed up with it that he just decided, hey, I need to wipe the earth clean of sin. Why does he hate sin so much? He hates sin not because he's like this weird, like dogmatic, ill-tempered individual. He hates sin because it's the thing that kept him from fulfilling his dream of doing life with his people. It was the thing that created a barrier or a dividing line that he couldn't do life with his people anymore. And so we see how much God hates sin when he causes, in Genesis 7, the earth to erupt with water. Go read this story about the flood. It's nuts if you study the language of it. There's oceans beneath the earth that just erupted through the earth, and then rain fell from the heavens for 40 days, and the combination of those two things created a worldwide flood that wiped the earth completely clean, nearly. God didn't wipe the whole earth clean. In his mercy, he actually raised up a man. I'm going to give you another chance. A man named Noah. Great job. Noah, he said, Noah, you got to build a big old boat, man, because I'm coming and I'm going to wipe the earth clean of sin. Noah's obedient. People think he's crazy, but Noah had found favor in the sight of God. So he builds a boat. Turns out he was right. The whole earth is wiped. Noah, his family, 2 of every kind of animal is all that's left on the earth. Water rested on the earth for several months. After it retreated, the ark lands on the top of a mountain called Ararat. It's in the Middle East over there, a mountain called Ararat. And it was sat there as the waters were slowly receding. Noah and his family walked off of the ark. And God had a fresh start with his people. And he gave Noah the same command he gave Adam. He said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But what's crazy about it all is that it did not take long for sin to begin its cycle once again. God had to put a law. Are y'all all right with this story this morning? God had to put a law in place in Exodus chapter 20. The 10 Commandments was the first piece of that law. And you had to keep the law. You had to uphold it if you're going to maintain right standing with God. But what humanity found in a hurry is that it was such a standard that no one could withhold it. No one could uphold it. Every man, every woman was falling short time and time again. God and man were separate, and God was devastated by it. Just think about his heart for a minute. He had this dream since before Genesis 1. You with me? He had this dream of doing life with his people, and now this thing called sin has entered the world and has kept his dream from becoming a reality. Now that no man and no woman can uphold the law, every man's falling short, God puts a system in place to where once a year the high priest would actually walk into the inner room of the tabernacle and offer a sacrifice. And that sacrifice would not do away with the penalty of sin. That sacrifice would just temporarily postpone the penalty of sin. What is the penalty of sin? Death. Romans 5:8, the wages of sin is death. That's just the reality. And so that sacrifice that the high priest would offer on the Day of Atonement once a year, delay the punishment. But no one could uphold the law and forever get rid of that punishment. Throughout the Old Testament, we see just a rigorous, awful cycle of man choosing God and worshiping him, and then when they honor him and they worship him, great victories come on their lives, right? We see the miracles happen where God literally takes a body of water called the Red Sea and just parts it into two walls. We see him on two other occasions take the Jordan River, once for Elisha, once for the people of Israel when they were entering Canaan. 3 separate times it was recorded that these bodies of water are just parting. Come on, that's nuts right there. We see God bring water from a rock. We've seen God bring manna from heaven. All these miracles are happening, and as God's people are just worshiping him, these great things are happening. But then when they get to a place of victory, they decide they don't need him anymore, and so they drift back into paganism and idolatry. So they serve other gods. Oh, I'm good. But then when all hell breaks loose, what's the first thing they do? God, I need you again. And God in his mercy honors that request. Isn't it incredible? He could have said, done with you. Forget you. He didn't know. He said, I will. And they returned to him, and God honors again, and great victory, and great things happen. And they don't need him anymore, and they abandon him in paganism and idolatry. How many of us have lived that cycle before? Isn't that nuts? When we think we're all right, we don't spend time with God. But when cancer comes, it's like, okay, I need him all of a sudden. God's calling us to a lifestyle where we learn to be steady and consistent, whether it's great or whether it's bad. We just love him and we want to do life with him. That's what he truly desires. We see this cycle happen throughout the Old Testament. And God has known since before the beginning of our world, that there would come a time when humanity understood that no man and no woman was going to be able to get this law thing right. There were 613 Levitical laws on top of the 10 Commandments. No man was going to be able to uphold that. God knew it. Humanity was starting to see it. What did God do? Toward the latter part of the Old Testament, God begins to send prophets to prophesy, to predict about, hey, humanity's not getting it right, but the prophet stands up and says, hey, I've got good news. God's going to send someone who will get it right. God's going to send someone who will be a deliverer, who will break this cycle of sin and wickedness, who will turn things right, make all things new, and recenter everything in our lives. He's coming. Isaiah said he's coming. Jeremiah said he's coming. Ezekiel said he's coming. Daniel said he's coming. Habakkuk, Joel, Amos, Jonah, they all said, Malachi said he's coming. Some scholars estimate over 300 prophecies were given about the coming Messiah, and humanity was thrilled to death because this cycle was eating generations alive. The Messiah is coming. He's coming. At the end of Malachi, we see something pretty bizarre happen. Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. He was the last prophet to die out. There's 400 years where nothing happens. And humanity's remembering what Joel said. They're remembering what Jeremiah said. And they're wondering, where is this deliverer that the prophets spoke about? Where is this guy that they said is going to be the Messiah that's going to come and do what they said he would do so we can actually live again? 400 years they wonder, and they were beginning to lose hope. But in the most extraordinary of ways, when the Testament turns from old to new, we see that God did not just send anyone as that deliverer. He could have sent anyone, but no, he thought it was fitting to send who? His own son. That's incredible right there. He didn't just send someone that wasn't connected to him or raise up someone that he had no love and emotion and connection with. No, he said, it is fitting that I would send my own son to do what they said could not be done, to demonstrate to the world what is possible when you truly live life connected to God, full of the Holy Spirit. And so in the most extraordinary of ways, Jesus himself is born in Jerusalem, raised in Nazareth, and for 33 years of his life, he never sinned. Isn't that crazy? Hebrews 4, I think, says it this way. Watch this. We don't have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. No, he was in all points tempted, just as we are, yet he was without sin. That's Jesus they're talking about. He faced everything we face, yet he was without sin. And it's crazy because as he was coming into the world and as his life was going on, his ministry's beginning to grow, and between ages 30 and 33, he begins to do all these incredible miracles. He knew what his destiny was. He knew why he was on the earth. He knew why God had sent him. See, a lot of the people in this time thought that the Messiah was just going to come and actually free the Jewish people from Roman captivity, from Roman oppression. Rome just kind of ran the show in that day, and so there's soldiers everywhere, and it's just a heavy Roman oppression. And so the Jewish people are sitting there thinking, okay, where's this Messiah? I'm tired of Rome having their way. I'm tired of these shoulders breathing down my neck. I'm tired of these regulations. No, the Messiah was coming on the scene for far more than to redeem a Jewish people from Rome. He was coming onto the scene to redeem both Jew and Gentile from the greater problem, the problem of sin that had entered the garden in Genesis 3, and the problem of death that had come as a result. Is this storyline making sense to everyone? Say yes. At the same time that Jesus knew why he was there, he also knew there was only one way that it would get done. There was a price for sin. We said it earlier, that price is death. There was a death that had to happen. The death of bulls and goats that the high priest would offer in the inner court once a year on the Day of Atonement was just doing the job for a little while. There had to be a greater death of a spotless lamb that would then come and pay the price, not once a year, but once and for all. Jesus was so crushed by this reality. We see him in Matthew, I think it's 26, verse 39, maybe somewhere in there. Yeah, we see Jesus the night before his crucifixion when he understands the magnitude of what he's about to endure. It's like becoming real. Y'all know, like the night before something dreadful, how that just really sets in? That's where Jesus is in this moment. He enters a garden called Gethsemane to pray. There's the weight of this reality, the weight of his calling and his purpose. The weight of redemption for humanity is all on his shoulders, and he comes before the Lord. He falls on his face, and he prays. He says, oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. What's he saying? He's saying, and I just imagine this agony. If you look further in this, he actually is sweating blood. And that's not some weird saying. That's actually a very rare scientific condition where the body is under such extreme overwhelm and extreme press that blood secretes from the pores of skin. That's where Jesus was sitting, was laying in this moment. He said, Father, as blood secreting from his pores, his tears are in his eyes, he says, if there's any other way than this way, I need to know. Please, if there's any other way, surely you've got something better than this. And the Father's basically like, no, there's only one way. The price for sin is death. And that's why you're here. You're here to pay a price. And what does Jesus do? He submits to his Father's will against everything his flesh desired. And he agreed with the Father's agenda, saying, I'm willing to pay any price, as he prays, not as I will, but as you will. I don't even know if Jesus got to sleep that night, but the next day the arrest started happening, and he begins to work his way toward what he knows is his destiny. He was surrendering to what we know today as a Roman execution called a crucifixion. He had no sin. He had done nothing wrong. But the crowds wanted him crucified because he confronted everything every power that they held. He confronted every piece of wealth that they had. And the people weren't having it. They wanted him crucified. He claimed to be the Son of God. And so as this Roman execution begins to take place, and one of the first things they do is they begin to whip him. How many of you ever played like you dip the end of a towel in some water and you know what I'm talking about? Some of you got little brothers. Y'all know exactly what I'm talking about, all right? So that's what's happening really on a whole nother level is Jesus is being whipped with a rope or with some sort of, I don't know, just some sort of painful device that the Romans would use at the beginning of their execution process. But then they took the whip to another level. It's called a scourging. A scourge was, when they would scourge him, they would actually take what looked like a mop. But that mop had different like bone fragments and different pieces of metal and sharp devices. And it was designed, when it latched onto human skin, unlike a whip, it wouldn't just keep going, it would latch to the skin. And they would yank it off and it would actually pull the skin from the body. And for 39 strikes, why 39? Because 40 would kill a man. They had studied this thing. They wanted to make it as long of a torturous process as possible. 39 stripes, scourge, ripping the skin from the flesh. Jesus is tied to a post the whole time, staying surrendered to the Father's will. What in the world kept him going? What in the world caused him to say, I'll pay this price? After the scourging happened, he wasn't even done yet because the biggest event of all hadn't even happened yet. And he already is unidentifiable. He already hardly has any skin. His organs and his bones are, I'm not trying to be morbid or any weird way. I just want us to see the price that he paid. When they finished scourging him, he was half a mile from where the cross would be. He was half a mile from that hillside. The locals in that day knew it as Golgotha. It was a mountain called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. And he had a half a mile's journey with no skin on his body to carry a massive, probably several 100-pound wooden cross. A half a mile. The road that he had to walk was called the Via Dolorosa. And he had to walk through the streets of Jerusalem and get that cross to that mountainside called Golgotha. We all know the story is when he got part of the way up the Via Dolorosa, he couldn't carry the cross anymore, so another man actually had to come and carry. His name was Simon of Cyrene. He had to come and carry the cross for Jesus. So Jesus is quite literally stumbling his way that near half-mile journey, trying to get to the mountain where he would give his life for the rest of humanity. When he finally gets to the mountainside, I wonder what it was like to look up and know that, hey, I've got to climb that thing. Y'all know what I'm saying? On a big race, like I ran that triathlon, I don't even want to try to compare these because these are two levels. I just want us to have a picture. Sometimes we dread hills. You know what I'm saying? We dread that last climb. This right here that we're talking about is just a whole nother beast. It's not even fair to mention the two in the same sentence. This is a whole nother world right here. But he finds his way to the top of that hill. And as they laid him on the two wooden beams that Simon had carried for him, they strapped his ankles to the cross and ran a nail through his ankles. And I'm not talking about a little nail that we use when we frame houses. I'm talking about a railroad spike. Y'all ever seen those things laying beside the railroad track? They drove that through his ankles, one in this wrist, one in this wrist. And for 6 hours, he hung on that cross, being crucified for all of humanity. How far was he willing to go? Not one time did he curse anyone. Not one time. He could have called upon the angels to get him down, yet he stayed. I've heard it, one poet said it this way: it wasn't 3 nails that held him to the cross. It was his love for you, and it was his love for me. Something greater than nails was holding him there. What would cause him to go to such ends? And he had not even faced the greatest agony of them all yet. You say, how is that possible? I'll tell you how it's possible. Because he was approaching an hour where God would actually place the sin of mankind upon his flesh. And when God looked at Jesus carrying the weight of all of the sin of all of the world, God, as we know from Genesis 3, can have nothing to do with sin. So in that moment where sin is on his son, God has to actually forsake sin that's being crushed in the flesh because he's holy and can't have anything to do with it. And Jesus had the most agonizing of all moments where his father actually turned his back. And Jesus cries out in Hebrew, he says, my father, why have you forsaken me? And he's just crushed, man. But he's still there, you know. He's still all in. He's still willing to pay any price. Isaiah 52, when the Romans got done with him, watch this. This is what it says in verse 14. Just as many were astonished at you. His visage was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of man. What that means is that he was marred beyond any man. He was absolutely unrecognizable. You would have had to do bone grafts and blood tests to figure out who he was. That's the state of his body. He didn't even look human anymore. He was marred beyond any other man. 6 hours later, Jesus dies on the cross, but he doesn't just die like we think he would. He suffocates to death, because that was the point of Roman crucifixion, where they would suppress the lungs like that. They couldn't open and close anymore, and suffocation would be the cause of his death. So my question is, what in the world would cause him to actually go to such lengths, to pay such a price for us? Let's go to Hebrews 12. This is incredible right here. Hebrews 12, verse 2 says that we should look to Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy, shout joy, for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Here's what I know. According to this verse, there was a joy that was before Jesus. This don't even make sense, y'all. There was something that he was so ached for, something he was so passionate about that was beyond his circumstance, that caused him to say, this price is worth it if it means that on the other side. As he's trying to carry the cross down the Via Dolorosa, I'm sure he's just reminding himself that, hey, this is worth it, this is worth it, this is worth it. You know, as they latch in one more time, this is worth it, this is worth it, reminding himself of the joy that is set before him. But the question still remains, what is that joy? It's the same joy that God got in the very beginning of time, where he put man and he put woman in the Garden of Eden, and he was enjoying fellowship with them. Jesus knew that he was coming to restore in one garden what was broken in another. He knew he was coming to restore. Hey, this sin thing has caused massive separation between God and man, but I'm coming to pay the ultimate price so that God and man can be together again. And I wonder if we find the Lord today and we'll look him in the eye and say, Lord, was that worth it? You remember the pain. You remember the Via Dolorosa. You remember the scourging. You remember the forsaking. You remember the cursing, the spitting. You remember all of it. Was it worth it? I could promise you, with tears in his eyes, he would say a resounding, you better believe it. Why? Because his people were reunited with him. And God's dream since before the foundation of the earth could actually take place. God and his people could be together again. I need to tell you this morning, to the person who feels like God does not want them, you've been lied to by the enemy or by somebody, I don't know, but either way, it's just outright ridiculous when you look at how incredibly high of a price that he paid. Don't you ever, for one other moment, ever believe that God doesn't want you. Look at what he's done for you. He had you in mind when he was making his way down the Via Dolorosa toward Golgotha. He knew what he was accomplishing. Don't live another moment thinking that you are not wanted by God. He died on your behalf. I need to also talk to the person who feels like, Tiffany, come on, where are you? Tiffany, yeah, she may be backstage. There she is. Yeah, come on, you're good. To the person, right here, to the person who feels like they've done too much. Anybody ever just be honest and say that, hey, sometimes I feel like I've done too much for God to want me? Anybody ever felt that way? Yeah, some. I want to say to you that he's done way too much for us to even be able to think that we've done too much. His sacrifice was greater than our mistakes. His commitment and his resolve to his Father's dream is so much superior to any crap that you think you've done in your life. It just pales in comparison. Don't believe for another day that you've done too much. You have let that thing keep you from God way too long. And I promise you, with the same tenacity that Jesus had on the cross, he is urging you to come back to him, to discover that he loves you, according to Jeremiah, with an everlasting love. A love that never originated and a love that will never end. Don't you ever think you've gone too far. Look at some of the examples in the New Testament. Paul was a murderer, man, ripping kids and families out of houses, killing anyone who professed the name Jesus. But he had an encounter with God on the road to Damascus. Lost his sight for a few days. A man named Ananias came and restored his sight. And Paul went on to be the greatest missionary the world's ever known. Promise you, you've not gone too far. I could list story after story after story of people that I know in this life who would tell you there was a time I felt like I had gone too far, but now they're standing here and their families are walking with God, and generations have shifted because they've come to the understanding that, wow, God really does love me with an everlasting love. There's an invitation in this room today, Ephesians 3, if you would. Paul's praying right here. Do you have 17? I don't know. You may not. It's okay if you don't. Yeah, you're good. Paul, in writing to the church of Ephesus here, in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 18, he's praying so urgently, not just for the church of Ephesus, but actually praying for us. And he says, I just wish that you would begin to understand the width, the height, and the depth of the love of God. Y'all ever sing that old song, Deep and Wide? Y'all know it's actually Deep and Wide. Y'all ever sing that old song? It's powerful, man. Paul is longing that there would be a people that would begin to understand just how outrageous the love of God is. It's so outrageous that when Paul's writing about it in 1 Corinthians, he has to actually use a new Hebrew word there to try and convey this type of love that God is offering. This is not like, I love ranch dressing and I love whatever else it is for you. Like this, I don't know, potato salad or sweet potato cow, I don't know. This is a different kind of love. This is agape. This is unconditional. This is you didn't deserve it, yet he gave it anyways. Paul's longing that we would understand, and here's the invitation in the room today. It's to make a commitment to a new journey where we would begin to understand how massively outrageous the love of God is. We're churched, we're in the Bible Belt, we're in the state of Alabama, there's podcasts everywhere. We know God loves us with our minds. If I went around and surveyed the room, do you know God loves you today? Yes, sir. But I'm afraid we've settled for intellect with the knowledge that God loves us, yet our heart has not yet been compelled by that love. And my prayer today is that we be able to make the transition from heart to soul and begin to see with our whole being just how ridiculous it is that he paid such a price to prove that he loved us. Romans 5 says God demonstrated his own love for us in this. It was while you were still in sin that he died for you. He didn't die for you on your best day. He died for you on your worst day. And he's offering you a new way to live. Would you stand to your feet? When you begin, listen right here, we're coming to a close. When you begin to see the love of God and just how ridiculous it is, you then have an opportunity to love him in return. It's 1 John 4. Let's go. Yeah, 1 John 4:19. We love him. Why? It's because he first loved us. You cannot truly love God until you have seen how great his love is for you. So the first thing that has to happen is you have to get revelation. You have to get understanding of his love. And then when you get revelation of his love and your soul begins to really get messed up by that, just blown away, like, oh, I can't believe this. You wake up every morning just loved, like, I cannot believe Jesus did that. And then like 2 weeks later, you're still just distraught, like, oh, I can't believe he did that. And you learn to live that way, and 2 years have gone by, and it's just like, man, I can't believe he did that. Oh, thank you. He did that, man. I'm just blown away. I can't believe he did that. What's crazy is 20 and 40 and 60 years will go by, and your kids will wake up saying the same thing because you taught them what it meant to be loved by God. And all of a sudden, you're 60, 70 years old, and you've got kids and grandkids, and they're all waking up saying, I can't believe he did that. And from one generation to the next, we are seeing that salvation is the greatest gift that could ever have been given to mankind. We are a redeemed people. When you really see his love, I want to share a story. Can I share a quick story real quick and then we'll be done? When you really see his love, everything begins to shift. There was a couple that when they got married, their lifelong dream together was to summit Mount Everest. They wanted so bad, I don't know, they were climbing Kilimanjaro and Denali, and They wanted the top one. They wanted the big dog. They wanted the top summit in the world. Time came for them to begin to summit Everest. They arrived at base camp and spent 3 or 4 weeks, acclimating to the altitude there. Do we have that picture of Everest? To go to the other one, that actually shows the graph. Check this out. This is Everest right here. Base camp's at the bottom. That's where they stay and begin to acclimate, and then the way it actually works is they'll go up to the Khumbu Glacier to Camp 1 and then have to come back down so that their bodies are slowly acclimating to the reduction of oxygen levels. But as this couple whose lifelong dream has been to be at 30,000 feet at the summit, make their way from base camp over the top of the Khumbu Glacier to Camp 1, to Camp 2, to Camp 3, to Camp 4. Camp 4 is in what's known as the death zone. The oxygen is so low that you have to be in and out in 48 hours or your body's probably not going to make it. They arrive at Camp 4. The only thing separating them from summit is the Hillary Step. Go to that second picture there. The Hillary Step, there it is. It's right there. It's a 40-foot vertical cliff that sits right beneath the summit of Everest. When they reached the Hillary Step, the wife was so exhausted she could not go any further. And so the husband just decided to ask her, can I go on another 10 minutes to the top just to say I have? Sure, honey, sure. Go on to the top. Go reach this stream, but I got to stay here. I'm not going to make it. The husband goes 20, 25 minutes maybe at most to the summit. They asked him on the back end how it felt when he got to the summit, and he said, I didn't feel anything. Nothing. Didn't mean nothing to me. Why? Because she wasn't there. He came back down off the summit, reached the Hillary Step, found that his wife was nearly dead. She's laying there on the Hillary Step. She can't get up, can't move around. They had to get people to carry her back down to past Camp 4, back down to Camp 3. A couple hours later, that woman died. And the biggest regret of this man's life is going to the summit without her. With tears in his eyes, you ought to watch the interview. He's just like, it didn't mean nothing to me because she wasn't there. Why do I tell you that story this morning? I'll tell you that story because when you see the love of God, you get to the point in your life, stay with me, we're almost there. You get to the point in your life where you want nothing apart from him. You don't want all the money in the world. You don't want the influence and the power. You just want him and what he has for your life. You realize that his agenda is so much better than your agenda. And you give the rest of your life saying, I'm just in you. I trust that you're going to provide for my every need. I'm not going on all these rant races, and I'm not chasing down what society calls the American dream. And I get it's the land of opportunity, but it's killing a lot of people who are running rampant trying to accumulate all that they can when they can't even take it with them. God's inviting us to a different way of living, but hear me, it begins with seeing how great that his love is. Because when you see how great that his love is, then you'll actually be able to love him, and your life will look totally different. Will you bow your heads?